Now, some listeners might be surprised to hear that you, as an economist, want to get some purchase on racism, to try to use economic analysis in order to explain the mechanisms whereby racism is perpetuated. And one of the things which will really stick in my mind in the book is an experiment that you describe among university students, where some of the players in an experiment had to make a choice between green and purple players who were job candidates in the experiment.
So what this experiment was trying to do was explore how stereotypes could form. You had a group of players of this game who were pretending to be workers, and they could be either green workers or purple workers. So these are just labels. They've got no significance, no baggage, nothing. And then the other half of the class, because it was a classroom experiment, were employers trying to decide whether to employ green workers or purple workers, or both or neither. And the workers had to decide whether to educate themselves. And then they could take a test which would indicate whether they were educated or not. But the employers didn't know for sure whether these workers were educated or not. All they could see was the test result and green or purple. An amazing thing happened. Very quickly, the employers, on the basis really of overreacting to some random results, the employers started to employ green workers. They came to the conclusion that the green workers were the educated ones and the purple workers weren't. And in response, perfectly rationally, the green workers started making sure they did get an education, and the purple workers gave up, because an education's expensive and you can't get a job. If you're not being given a job, it's not worth getting an education. And in 20 minutes, you had these racial stereotypes built up. The purple workers, they're lazy, they don't acquire education. And by the way, turns out the stereotypes were true. They were self-fulfilling, because the purple workers didn't get an education. 20 minutes is all it took. You don't need the legacy of slavery or anything. And the students got so angry. The purple workers would say, you weren't employing me. I didn't get an education because you wouldn't employ me. And their employers would say, well, I wouldn't employ you because you didn't get an education. What was very striking about this example is that's been backed up by real-world data. So a couple of economists mailed out 5,000 CVs to real employers. Some of them are very good CVs, some of them are less good. And with a toss of a coin, they put either distinctively white names or distinctively African-American names on the top of those CVs. They mailed them out to see what sort of response they got. What they found, well, disturbing but not surprising, the white CVs got more invitations to interview than the black CVs, even though it was purely the toss of the coin. There was no difference in quality between the CVs. More disturbing, the good white CVs got more job offers or interview offers than the mediocre white CVs. But the good black CVs with more education, with more experience, did not get any more interview offers than the mediocre black CVs. So there you had, in black and white, so to speak, in a real-world experiment, the same response that you got in this little laboratory game. Employers not respecting the qualifications of black workers, and black workers in response not getting qualified, because why would you? We respond to incentives. If the qualification is valueless, why would you acquire it?
Let me ask you about cities, because you're clearly very positive about cities, and cities come across in the book as sort of machines that generate ideas. So why do you think cities are so sort of crucial to this worldview that you're describing?
Well, again, this is the evidence that comes out of the data. So, for example, we tend to think of people in cities as being paid more than people in the country. And that's not quite true. What actually is true is that people who have lived in cities for a long time are paid more than people who have lived in the countryside for a long time. If they leave cities and move to the country, they are paid more than people who lived in the country all their lives, but their rate of pay increase slows down. And if they move back to the city, it speeds up again. So it's almost as though they're being rewarded for all the things that they're learning. And I think it's almost self-evident that cities help people learn. They are universities of life. You're always bumping into people. So, I mean, I'm a huge fan of cities. The other thing that people don't appreciate about cities is that cities are extremely environmentally friendly. The ownership of cars in cities is low. The use of public transport is very high. I'm not saying this is because of the moral superiority of urbanophiles, because it's not. It's nothing to do with morality. It's purely to do with the incentives. It's much easier to get around when you all live very close to each other, and it's expensive to have a big house. It's expensive to have a garden with lots of pesticide. It's expensive to buy a garage to put your third car in. None of this makes any sense. So instead you cram yourself into a tiny flat. You get to the flat via an elevator, which is one of the most efficient machines ever devised, and your flat is heated by the flat beneath, and it heats the flat above you. And this is all very, very good for the planet, and nothing whatsoever to do with morality. It's all a response to economic incentives. So I'm not saying the government should subsidise city living, but at the moment the government taxes cities a lot and redistributes the benefits to the countryside. And I'm not quite sure, when you've got this amazingly technologically creative and environmentally friendly way of living, why we want to tax it so heavily and pay people to move out to the sticks.
I was really amused in the book that you go all the way back through human history and you apply a division of labour analysis to the reason why the Neanderthals might have died out. Tell me a little bit more about that.
This is entirely speculative, but it's fun. I mean, the last chapter of the book is very, very speculative. I talk about the data, but there's not much data from 1 million years BC. But one of the ideas that has been emerging from archaeology is that there are two types of division of labour that Homo sapiens was good at and Neanderthals weren't. One is division of labour between men and women. They're able to specialise more and everybody gets more done. Of course, we now regard that as a bit Stone Age. Well, the argument is, well, that's literally true. It is a Stone Age innovation, the division of labour between men and women. And also the general division of labour between different communities, which only works if you have trade. And the theory is that Neanderthals weren't very good at trade. They were perfect, they were strong, they were smart, but somehow they were missing the trade module from their brains. There's very little evidence of Neanderthal trade. And archaeologists and economists who've run computer simulations of what sort of difference that might have made have concluded, well, it could have made a huge difference and could have overcome the intrinsic advantages of the Neanderthals. They just weren't willing to trade with each other, and that's why they died out. Which, at a time when the world seems to be turning towards protectionism, is, I think, worth remembering.
Many of the ideas in your book are counterintuitive, and that I suppose is part of its great attraction, which makes it so enjoyable. But do you hope that, having read it, people will be able to go out in the world and perhaps spot patterns for themselves, armed with some of the concepts that you've introduced them to?
Well, I hope so. The exciting thing for economics, for me, is that it's all around us. I mean, I love reading books about quantum physics or that kind of thing, or astronomy, but it's not all around us in the same way. It doesn't affect everyday life in the same way. And economics really is everyday, and I hope that people read my books and enjoy them, but also see the world a little bit differently and can become undercover economists of themselves.